You are listening to the West Village Church Sermons podcast. We exist to make disciples who love God, love their neighbor, and make disciples. To learn more about how you can get connected, visit us online at westvillage.church. Now, let's jump into this week's teaching.
I went shopping for a Mother's Day card. So here are a couple of cards that I read. One said on the front cover, "It's Mother's Day. Relax, take a long nap, put your feet up, and don't worry about anything." And then when you open it up inside, it said, "Ha ha ha, now that's a funny card, isn't it?" Another card said on the front cover, "It's Mother's Day, Mom. Forget about the cooking, forget about the cleaning, forget about the laundry." And I opened up inside, it said, "Just pretend you're Dad. Happy Mother's Day." I didn't buy them. But this is the way we often respond to Proverbs chapter 31, impossible, not likely. In my first church as a pastor, as we approached Mother's Day, my first year, just out of school. We approached Mother's Day, and one of the women came up to me and she said, "Brian Talbot, you had better not preach on Proverbs 31 for Mother's Day. I have heard that so often about the things that are impossible for me to do." So I didn't for 26 years. About 15 years ago, I finally preached on Proverbs 31. The book of Proverbs is about the way of God's wisdom. It's a practical book meant to help us walk out God's wisdom in our everyday life. And I'm giving this message today because Proverbs 31 is the highlight of the book of Proverbs. It's like a final summary or a final knockout punch. And well, it is Mother's Day. And if you grew up in the church or you've been around the church for a while, you probably associate Proverbs 31 with Mother's Day. And maybe you're one of those people who is saying or maybe muttering under your breath, "Oh no, not this again." Well, I can understand that kind of response, but if we get a proper perspective and approach, our response will be very different. Today we're starting a series on the book of Proverbs that will go for May and for June. So I'm starting Proverbs 31 for this first message, and it's like I almost like to say, spoiler alert. You know, sometimes if you listen to a podcast or talking about a movie or a book, and they say, spoiler alert, then I'm going to tell you how it turns out. Well, that's what it's like today. Proverbs 31 is the end of the book. And when we come to Proverbs 31, we see where the whole book is aiming to arrive, and then next week we'll return to the beginning, to that passage that was read earlier. Here's the challenge. The book of Proverbs has 31 chapters. This is my challenge for you. If you read one chapter a day, you can read the entire book in a month. Proverbs is about the way of wisdom. As we look at chapter 31, we can ask, what highlights about the way of wisdom do we get from this passage? What highlights about the way of wisdom do we get from this passage? And this is where we start. The way of wisdom, the way of God's wisdom, is for all of us, verses 1 and 2. The fact is that Proverbs 31 is meant for all of us, everyone. Verse 1 says, the words of King Lemuel, an oracle that his mother taught him. So verse 1 is sort of like a superscription. We find them in the Psalms. It's like a mini foreword or like a title head on a formal letter. Lemuel is a king, but we don't know who he is. He's probably a non-Israelite. He has a mother who teaches him an oracle, which means an inspired utterance. It comes from God. It seems that Lemuel and his mother are followers of Yahweh, the one true God, the God of Israel, although they are not native Israelites. And the entire chapter goes together from verse 1 to verse 31. It doesn't start at verse 10. It's a chapter that goes together. And what it gives us is a mother's wise counsel. Mother knows best. The principles are given in particular context of a king, verses 1 and 9, and of a wife. Now, these principles are meant to be applied to each one of us in our specific context. This is not just for kings. It's not just for wives or mothers or women. You need to get this point as you come to this chapter, but for the whole book of Proverbs. We need to get this point. The whole book of Proverbs is like this. We're given concrete examples, but the principles, even if that example doesn't apply to you, and it may, but even if it doesn't apply to you, that particular concrete example, the principles still apply to us, can be practically applied to our different context. So what's the origin of chapter 31 of Proverbs? Well, God, first of all, of course. It is an oracle, a divine utterance, and therefore something we need to listen to. Well, who does God use to give this wise counsel? King Lemuel? Well, only indirectly. King Lemuel is just writing down what his mother taught him. God is using this woman to give us his wisdom for living. And in verse 2, it seems to say that King Lemuel is hearing his mother's voice in his head. And so we read this in verse 2. What are you doing, my son? What are you doing, son of my womb? What are you doing, son of my vows? He hears his mother's voice in his head. I mean, do you know what I mean? We all hear our parents' voices in our heads for better or for worse, but in this case for King Lemuel, it is definitely for better. The book of Proverbs starts by comparing two women, Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly. And this is a personification of wisdom and foolishness, but let me explain that. So personification is a literary device or technique giving human characteristics to something that is inanimate or abstract, like wisdom and foolishness. So here's the point. Wisdom and foolishness are not human. I mean, they're not truly persons like you and me. However, they're given human characteristics to help us to relate to them. How we act, how we put these proverbs into action tells us whether we're with Lady Wisdom or Lady Folly. How we act is how we know whom we follow, Lady Wisdom or Lady Folly. In fact, Proverbs 31 is the highlight of this whole book of Proverbs. And the woman in this passage is Lady Wisdom. Wisdom personified. Like the best and an ideal woman. Listen, who does not exist. Our world has many definitions and examples of wisdom, from Wikipedia to prominent philosophers. This is where many people go looking for wisdom. However, there's a significant difference here in the book of Proverbs, and that is that God is a part of the definition of wisdom. The main point is that God is calling us to follow his way of wisdom. The main point of the book of Proverbs, the main point of Proverbs 31 is that God is calling us to follow his way of wisdom. And that's why I call this series for May and June, The Way of Wisdom. So what is God's way of wisdom? How do we know we are following God's way of wisdom? Well, this last chapter of the book of Proverbs highlights the most important signposts on the way of God's wisdom. So this is the first signpost. The first signpost is that the way of God's wisdom is for all of us. Not just for kings or a wife or a woman or whatever, but for all of us. The way of God's wisdom is for all of us. Second, the way of God's wisdom makes justice a priority. I like to read this passage, Proverbs 31. If you have your Bible, you can follow along. Proverbs 31, I'll start at verse 3. Do not give your strength to women, your ways to those who destroy kings. It is not for kings, O Lemuel. It is not for kings to drink wine, or for rulers to take strong drink, lest they drink and forget what has been decreed and pervert the rights of all the afflicted. Give strong drink to the one who is perishing, and wine to those in bitter distress. Let them drink and forget their poverty and remember their misery no more. Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and the needy. The way of God's wisdom makes justice a priority. Now, we all know what a priority is. Priorities help us act. They help us organize our lives. So, for instance, many students are working on finishing their school year, but there are many things that can distract you. How about the new video game, which is much more interesting and much more fun than your studies, or longing to go for a walk or a bike ride, especially now that the weather is so nice. And of course, you know your friends are going there as well. And then there's that new series on Netflix, or Spotify has the newest album of your favorite singer. I mean, what are you going to do? Okay, listen to me, everyone, all of you. What you do will show your priorities, and your true priorities will determine what you do. What you do will show your priorities, and your true priorities will determine what you do. So, I mean, if you're a student, finishing well in school is your priority, then you're not going to let your study time be taken away by these other things. I mean, hey, for all of us, summer's just around the corner. Surely, summer's just around the corner, and there'll be some extra spare time to do those things that we want to do. Now, there are two things in particular that might distract a king, well, or a leader or any person from the priority of justice: addiction to sex and addiction to alcohol. And we are talking about addiction as we're looking at this passage. So, the passage is not advocating celibacy. Hey, let's face it, every king needs children. And that day, especially male children. The passage is speaking against unrestrained sexual gratification, what we call sexual addiction. And the women, notice in verse 3, it's women, it's plural. So they're either those who provide sex outside of marriage, or maybe a large harem that the king has, a large harem of concubines. And the best I can figure when the Old Testament talks about concubines is like semi-wives, official personal call girls for the king alone. So we need to just think of David's lust, King David's lust for Bathsheba, to see how justice was perverted and a good man was murdered. King David took Bathsheba, who was not his wife, to bed with him because he lusted after her. And when she became pregnant, he covered up the sin by having her husband killed so that he could marry her and claim the baby as legitimate. Well, there's a second distraction. Verse 4 and 5 make it clear that what's being talked about is not a lack of abstinence, but drinking to the point of inebriation, getting drunk. So repetition, you notice, to drink wine, to take strong drink, it indicates an addiction to alcohol, drinking too much. So obviously, the king had wine cellars. Or the following admonition to give out strong drink and wine in verse 6, well, it wouldn't make sense. So the real issue is to forget justice, what law decrees, and deprive all the oppressed of their rights. Forget to enforce the laws to help and protect the poor and the marginalized of his society. Look at verse 6 and 7. Give strong drink to the one who is perishing, and wine to those in bitter distress. Let them drink and forget their poverty and remember their misery no more. Now, as you might imagine, verse 6 and 7 have different interpretations. Here's what I like. The interpretation that I like best is the proper use of alcohol for either medication, for medicine, or to give a feast for the poor and less fortunate to help ease their suffering, even if only for a short time. Justice, especially related to the poor, is a major theme in the book of Proverbs. The point is that we, not only the king, we need to work against those things that would distract us from justice and the pursuit of justice. And the king of that day, when the Proverbs were written, had particular temptations, obviously, along the line of sexual addiction and alcohol addiction. Addictions that can tempt us today as well. The way of God's wisdom makes justice a priority. The book of Proverbs gives many concrete examples of walking in the way of wisdom, and some may apply directly to us. Again, some may not. We're not kings, and even if the concrete example, like being a king, doesn't apply to us, the principle still applies. So I'm trying to show that to you in this chapter because you can apply that in other chapters as well. What might distract us from making justice a priority? Well, addiction of any sort, including sex or alcohol, would be a great distraction. But for most of us, this is not what's going to bring the admonition home to us. So what might distract us from making justice a priority? Well, first of all, there's complacency, an attitude that says, I don't care. The people dying in India and Pakistan are in India and Pakistan. They're not close by me. And then there's selfishness or greed, an attitude that says, I'm too busy getting what I want. Seeking justice at this point might get in the way of my financial and material goals. Well, for some people, it's convenience. That's a distraction. I don't want to jeopardize my own comfort. I don't want to go out of my way. Seeking justice is that's too much effort. Complacency, selfishness, convenience. Well, these attitudes are challenged as we move on to verse 8 and 9. Look what it says. Open your mouth for the mute. That means speak up for those who cannot speak up for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouth and judge righteously, meaning fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and the needy. So what is justice? Justice is not just about right laws. I mean, it is about that. The rule of law can be very helpful in society in terms of having a peaceful society. But justice is not just about right laws, but also about right relationships. From the perspective of the king or the leader, he is to enact righteous decrees to protect the poor. Well, we can't enact these decrees, but we can support our government when they do. And when they don't, we can complain. We can be a voice for those who have no voice because they're socially and economically too weak to defend themselves against the rich and the powerful. We can be a voice to defend the rights of the poor and the needy. What is said here of the king is valid for every follower of Jesus in their personal sphere of activity, your personal sphere of activity. Well, you might still be thinking, does this apply to me? The way of God's wisdom makes justice a priority. How can we practice justice? What are some steps, even small steps, we can take to make justice a priority? Okay, not everybody wants to go marching downtown onto Parliament Hill with a placard of some sort. Right? I get that. Not everyone will write letters to our elected officials on particular issues, although these are ways of practicing justice. But there are some other ways we as a congregation and individuals can practice justice. For instance, we can investigate organizations that focus on justice, like IJM, International Justice Mission. It's a Christian organization that focuses on justice in other countries. We can go to their website and be informed about the forced labor of men and women and children. It's called slavery, and it still happens in our world today. If you don't know about that, you need to know about that. They also work with young children who are forced into internet pornography or even into brothels for sex tourism. We can be informed. We can pray. I rejoiced when I heard that our Canadian government passed a law that people from Canada who travel to another country to use children there can be convicted when they come back here. Yeah, amen is right. We can support a child in a third world country. We heard about this last week on our Compassion Sunday. We saw that compassion and justice are really closely linked, and with the poor as well. I know many of you support a child in the 2/3 world, some with compassion, some with other organizations. I consider this to be an act of justice. We are able to do this, helping someone who is deprived of so much. We can do this. I consider this an act of justice, of walking in justice in the way of God's wisdom. And perhaps you can only support one, but at least one child. It makes a huge difference for that child and for their family. So in our congregation, we encourage people to use Compassion Canada because it's a Christian organization and support children through them. Compassion emphasizes working with the local church here and the local church there in another country and encouraging relationships with the child by writing letters. And as a church, also in the past, we have supported larger projects that affect the village, like kits for new and expectant mothers in Guatemala. Well, we also support our food bank in Westboro. Now, in the past, our youth were involved in collecting food for this local food bank as a way of helping the poor. Every Tuesday night, they would go out from door to door and they would collect food. That's justice. That's justice in action. The past 2 years, we've allocated a part of our Christmas offering to be given to the Westboro Food Bank. It's a way of walking out justice, that we as a church have been walking out justice. Some of our people are involved in helping people at the OCH buildings, Ottawa Community Housing buildings. Golden Manor is an OCH building, Hampton Court, McEwen Court. These are residents for seniors who are on social assistance. And in each case, what we are doing is distributing food, but also building relationships. This is justice in action. Justice doesn't have to be some concept that's way out there that we can't understand. No, it can be pretty simple and straightforward. This is justice in action. And these are some illustrations of bringing the issue of justice close to home and making it a priority. Doing a good day's work for your employer, that's justice. Treating your employee properly, that's justice. The way of God's wisdom makes justice a priority. Third, the way of God's wisdom makes us a person of strong character. So this is the larger section of the chapter. We'll focus on 10 to 27 right now. I want to point out some highlights. Now, I want you to listen to this. You have to get this. This is not just an impossible job description for your mother or your wife or whoever. It isn't. I mean, you need to get that point. The ideal wife and mother are used as an example, as heroes, to challenge all of us to be a noble person. There are characteristics that are found throughout the Proverbs. So these are characteristics that are found throughout the Proverbs, and they certainly apply to all of us in our situation. So the way of God's wisdom makes a person of strong character. So what does it mean to be a person of strong character? Looking at our passage, well, we can say a person of strong character is a person of integrity. Look at verses 10 and 11. An excellent wife who can find? She's far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. Excellent, meaning noble, valiant. Verse 10. This person is at a level that's a cut above mediocrity. In the question format, like who can find? It shows that it's really rare to find a person like this. And if you find someone like this, son, you're going to want to make her your wife because they're rare. She's priceless. This is someone capable of an intimate relationship. Look at verses 11 and 12. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. Both the husband and the wife are capable of and enjoy a continuing intimate relationship with each other. And this is shown by his trust in her, verse 11, and her good, meaning her goodwill, toward him, verse 12. In this context, they lack nothing of true value. If it is true for the husband, it's true for the wife. And trust is implied in the relationship. Trust in each other, trust in God, pointing to a strong spiritual relationship as well as a strong human relationship with one another. A strong character includes diligence and hard work. And what we have in verses 13 to 18 are many illustrations of diligence and hard work. I'm going to read that, starting at verse 13. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. She is like the ships of the merchant. She brings her food from afar. She rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and portions for her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands, she plants a vineyard. She dresses herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. What I see in these verses 13 to 18, it describes sources of income and then the investment of that income, which becomes a further source of income. This is a very successful business. This is a very successful business woman. And she works outside the home. So look at what's said about this ideal woman, really lady wisdom. Verse 13 reflects a positive attitude, willing hands. She does weaving with animal products, that would be wool, with vegetable products, that would be flax to produce clothing. Verse 14, with the income from her textile industry, she can buy exotic and different foods from faraway places, tasty foreign delicacies. To be like the ships of the merchant points not only to the foreign origin of the food, but the quantity. There is lots of food. Verse 15 uses the metaphor of a lioness who hunts at night. The idea is that she puts the well-being of her family before herself, whether or not it is still dark when she gets up. Verse 16, considers. It shows a strategy, a solid business plan. Out of her earning, she selects a field, she buys it, plants a vineyard. So she clears the field of the stones, plants choice vines, and cuts a wine press, being Israel, probably out of stone. I mean, it makes me tired just to think about all this. She probably hired help for the project, verse 17, but she was the one overseeing it, not her husband. And she was actually involved in some of the physical work. The idea behind verse 17, dresses herself with strength and makes her arms strong, is physical and spiritual preparation for the task. Verse 18, her merchandise is profitable. Again, the business plan works, largely because of her diligence in preparation and carrying out the plan. Her lamp does not go out at night means that she works past sundown in a culture that doesn't have any electricity. She doesn't stay up all night and then get up. How do you get up if you stayed up all night? You don't. Nobody can do that. It is not a suitable lifestyle. It's a metaphor. The lamp goes out from poverty and a lack of oil or neglect to refurbish the oil, like the parable Jesus told of the foolish virgins. But that's not happening to this woman. Verse 19, she puts her hand to the distaff and her hands hold the spindle. So verse 19 is like a hinge verse. It sort of sums up what's said in the verses just before it, and then it carries on into what comes ahead. So the distaff is a forked instrument used to double the thread, making 2-ply or 3-ply thread. I don't know what that means. If you work with this stuff, that's explanation, and if you work with it. I think, though, what I think is that, we went to this village just the other side of Orleans, where they show you how life was 150 years ago, 150 years ago. And there was a woman there who was taking wool and making it into thread, little threads. And then this distaff would be an instrument, an implement that would help her take those small threads and weave them together to be a double or a triple thread. I suspect that happens in a factory today. The spindle was an instrument with handles on both ends. I get this one, and you could wrap the wool around it either for use or for storage. Well, anyhow, you get the point. Strong character includes diligence and hard work. That's what it's all about. What this looks like for you, it would depend on your situation. Proverbs is really big on diligence and hard work. If you've read through the book of Proverbs, you'll know. Proverbs is really big on diligence and hard work. As followers of Jesus, we want to do whatever we're doing as unto the Lord, pleasing to Him, honoring Him. A strong character adds generosity to integrity and diligence. And this is all part of having a strong character. So, verse 20, she opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. Wisdom shows generosity to those who need it the most, making the practical practice of justice a priority. Opens her hand to the poor, reaches out her hands. Well, it may mean she invites them into her home or she gives them material aid. Verse 21, she's not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household are clothed in scarlet. She shows generosity to her household, giving them not only the food that she's acquired from the sale of her clothes, but also the clothes that they need. Scarlet clothing, to keep them warm, is probably costly wool. Verse 22, she makes bed coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. She's generous to herself, making rich coverings for her bed and fine clothes from linen for herself. Now, I wonder what the thread count was on her sheets. Don't let anyone tell you that you should never buy anything nice for yourself. Don't let yourself tell you that. This woman did. Purple is a dye that was harvested from a sea animal off the Phoenician coast, which meant there wasn't a lot of it, and so it was very expensive. Verse 3, her husband is known in the gates. He sits among the elders of the land. She was generous toward her husband. He sits among the elders of the land, so probably at the city gate, which symbolizes the city's collective authority and power. He had a leadership position, and she encourages him in this. Verse 24, she makes linen garments and sells them and delivers sashes to the merchant. She is generous to her colleagues. Other business people, in a way that's a little uncertain, delivers sashes to the merchants. But perhaps it means that she empowers others to be successful in their business. She's learned how to do it. She does it well, and she empowers others to be successful in their business. Her real success is in her strength and dignity. Successful in clothing business, but her real success is in her strength and dignity. Verse 25, strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. Her real success is her wisdom and the teaching of kindness. Verse 26, she opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. And her real success is in her diligence. Verse 27, she looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. With a strong character, she can be lighthearted about the days to come, even if they contain adversity. So let me say this again. This is not a job description of any human being can fulfill. The point is, a person of strong character will be a person of integrity and diligence and generosity. This person uses everything the Lord has given and puts the needs of others first. I heard an interview with Josh McDowell. Josh McDowell has written many books on the topic of defending your faith. And I've read some of those books. And he made this statement that really stuck with me. He said, I do not try to be the best in what I do. I try to do the best in whatever I do. I think that's a really important distinction. Sometimes we think that a strong character might mean someone who is a bully, but even our society says, no, that person actually is very weak. God says that a person of strong character is someone who has integrity and diligence and generosity. We see this in the life of Jesus. Jesus was really the only human being that can fulfill everything in this passage. But don't you want to be more like Jesus? The way of God's wisdom makes us a person of strong character. 4, the way of God's wisdom gives praise where praise is due. I want to read these last few verses. Verse 28, her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her the fruit of her hands and let her works praise her in the gates. Praise is an expression of warm approval, of admiration. And the way of God's wisdom gives praise where praise is due. Have you noticed how quick we are to criticize? Well, at least I am. Maybe you aren't. Have you noticed how quick we are to criticize? That seems to be the first sort of normal response. We criticize people in authority over us, whether it's our boss or whether it's our politicians that are passing laws that we don't like. We criticize the people in church. We criticize our children. But what if we changed our attitude and decided to look for ways to give appropriate praise to those around us? Would it really take that much energy and effort to do this? In verses 28 to 31, we have children giving praise to this person along with her husband and the narrator. And look at how many times the word praise is used. Her household praises her. The community praises her. It isn't necessary to be doing all these things to receive praise. The thing is to give praise where praise is due. All right, so it's Mother's Day. How can you praise your mother, giving her the praise that is her due? And if you don't have a mother, it's a mother that you know who would appreciate receiving praise where praise is due. Now, I understand for some of us it is harder than for others, but even in complicated relationships, I encourage you to remember the point is to give praise where praise is due. And this may require some reflection on your part. If you can't think of anything to praise, then maybe you need to keep reflecting on it. But you can do it. Think of ways to praise your mother, your father, your wife, your husband, your children, all the volunteers that we have at our church who come early to do the work so that we can meet together like this. And then afterwards, the hospitality table and other people who are involved. Think of ways to praise. It is good for each of us to give praise where praise is due and to receive praise where praise is due. Finally, the way of God's wisdom is all about relationship, verse 30. But a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. The fear of the Lord is where the book of Proverbs starts and where it ends. The fear of the Lord and the entire book of Proverbs is all about relationship, our relationship with the Lord. The Bible, Proverbs included, is not a self-help book. If anything, it's a Jesus help me book. We're able to walk in the way of wisdom, God's wisdom, the way of the Lord, because Jesus walks with us and because the Spirit of Jesus is in us. All lasting change comes from the inside out. You can put change on for a while, but all lasting change comes from the inside out. And Jesus gives us a changed heart, and we respond to his love. You need to get this point. We respond to his love by walking in the way of wisdom. We're not trying to walk in the way of wisdom or keep any of the admonitions in the Bible to gain the love of Jesus or God. You can't and you don't need to. Jesus died on the cross for you because God loved you so much, he sent his one and only son. And that word delivered up means delivered up and died on the cross. But in response to what Jesus has done for us, we want to walk in the way of wisdom. and walk out the change that he's making in our life. Now, I want to make this point. There are many things that satisfy, while they seem to satisfy, like charm and beauty, a great figure, a good-looking face, toys, tools, cars, promotions, but that's all deceptive and fleeting. That's what our passage says, and you think about it, and that is very, very true. And if that's where you're looking for your fulfillment, you're going to be really disappointed. Charm and beauty fade with time and age. That good-looking face would develop wrinkles despite whatever cream you use for however long or whatever you pay for it, no matter what the advertisement says. And as for the great figure, one older woman said this to me. She said, I'm the same weight as 20 years ago. It's just my load has shifted. I thought it was pretty funny too. The man toys rust and wear out. Your promotion has limited time because there's someone else who is younger, more energetic, perhaps more educated and experienced than you, and they want your job. Is that where you're truly going to find your fulfillment? No, it's not. Not at all. I want to tell you there are two things that are worthwhile. Two things that are most worthwhile. There are two things that will last for all eternity. You know what those things are? Your relationship with Jesus and your character. But that's it, folks. Two things. Your relationship with Jesus and your character. Those are the two things that are going to last forever. So needless to say, those are the two things where you need to have highest priority. Our relationship with Jesus and our character will last forever. Do you know Jesus personally as Lord and Savior? Have you come to Jesus for forgiveness of sins? He gives that. He can give that because he's God and he died on the cross for you and for me. Have you given your life to Jesus and received his new life into your life? Well, God is calling us to follow the way of wisdom. The way of wisdom is for all of us. The way of God's wisdom makes justice a priority. The way of God's wisdom makes us a person of strong character. The way of God's wisdom gives praise where praise is due. And the way of God's wisdom is all about relationship, the fear of the Lord. And with God's help, we can and we will walk in the way of God's wisdom. Amen.